He stood in the boutique, unnoticed, ignored by the staff. But what happened next shocked everyone. Their mockery turned into a nightmare, and the punishment they received was far worse than they could have imagined. But what happened after that? It will leave you speechless. Let's start from the beginning. The doorbell of Gentry Luxe, a high-end boutique nestled in the heart of downtown New York, rang with a soft chime as Damian Williams stepped inside. Dressed in a sharply tailored suit that hugged his broad frame, his presence should have commanded attention. Yet, the staff behind the counter hardly noticed him, too absorbed in their idle chatter about the latest fashion trends to spare him a glance. One of the salespeople, a young woman named Jenna, finally broke from the gossip to look at him. Her smile was thin, tight, almost as if she were forcing it. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, but the coolness in her tone was unmistakable. Her gaze swept over him, scanning his clothes with an almost imperceptible sneer, a look that left Damian feeling unseen and unworthy. Her eyes lingered on his shoes, well worn, yet polished, and then shifted to his suit, dismissing him with a quick flick of her gaze. Damian's chest tightened. He had been to this store countless times before, spent more money than most people made in a year, yet today, it felt different. The staff didn't seem to recognize him. They treated him like an outsider, someone who didn't belong in their world. "Do you need something specific?" Jenna asked, her voice dripping with judgment. Damian fought the surge of frustration rising within him. He knew what was happening. This wasn't a mistake. It was a subtle form of exclusion. But he didn't let his anger show. Instead, he kept his tone calm. "I'm looking for a suit for an event this evening." Jenna snorted in response, her eyes rolling as she turned away. "I'll send someone more suited for you," she muttered, her words thick with sarcasm. It wasn't just the words. It was the silent message behind them. Her assumption that he couldn't afford the high-end pieces on display, that he didn't belong, was more painful than any insult. Damian's pride stung, but he didn't move. He stood there, unshaken, determined to prove to her, and to himself, that no one could undermine his confidence, especially not the prejudices of the boutique staff. Damian stood near the high-end section of suits, studying the display with a level of focus that could only be described as deliberate. The sleek lines of the garments, the richness of the fabrics, all of it was a far cry from the disinterest the store had shown him. Jenna, meanwhile, continued her conversation with a colleague, her back turned to him as she whispered just loud enough for him to overhear. "Who does he think he's fooling? Probably some basketball player or a rich kid who doesn't know how to dress." The words were a cold jab, slicing through him in a way that left a bitter taste on his tongue. He'd worked tirelessly to carve out his place in the world, to be seen as more than a stereotype. And yet here they were, reducing him to nothing more than a lazy assumption about his worth. The sting of it was sharp, but it only solidified his resolve. He wasn't going to just buy a suit today. He was going to make sure they saw him for who he really was. As Jenna's voice drifted away, absorbed in her idle chatter, Damian's eyes narrowed. His decision was made. The store might have been indifferent to him, but he wasn't about to let their prejudice dictate the course of his actions. He made his way over to the most expensive suit on display, an immaculate black three-piece from a designer known for its exclusivity and exorbitant price tag. It was the epitome of elegance, a statement piece that would surely make any man stand out. And that's exactly what he intended to do. At the register, the young cashier paused when he scanned the tag, his eyes betraying an unspoken surprise. It was the same look Jenna had given him earlier, the one that assumed he wasn't supposed to be here, not in this store, not with this kind of money. "Will that be cash or card?" the cashier asked, his voice betraying a hint of disbelief. "Card," Damian replied without missing a beat. his tone calm and steady. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a platinum credit card, its gleaming surface catching the light. The cashier hesitated, momentarily stunned. Damien met his gaze, never flinching, his confidence unwavering. This was the moment. Damien was already halfway out the door, the weight of the platinum card swipe still hanging in the air when it hit him. The recognition. He hadn't expected it to come so soon, but there it was, the split-second shift in the atmosphere that he had been waiting for. Jenna, still caught up in her idle gossip, saw the card run through the machine. Her eyes went wide. She froze for a moment, the color draining from her face, as her gaze flicked nervously toward the door. "Wait!" she called out, her voice suddenly much less confident, the tightness in her words betraying her panic. "Mr. Williams, sir." Damien's hand hovered over the door, his fingers curling just around the handle. He paused, but didn't turn around immediately. His heart didn't pound in dread, but in anticipation. This moment was his. He could feel the tension building, like the first crack of thunder before the storm. Jenna was closer now, rushing to catch up, the desperation in her tone unmistakable. You're the CEO of Williams & Co., aren't you?" Damien turned then, his face an impassive mask. His lips curled into a slow smile, but it was far from warm. "Yes, I am," he said, his voice even and controlled, but with an edge of coldness that cut through the air. Jenna's expression faltered, her mouth opening but no words coming out. Her eyes darted, piecing together the puzzle in real time. Her cheeks flushed crimson as the magnitude of her mistake became clear. The man she had just dismissed so casually wasn't just any customer. He was Damien Williams, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, one of the most influential figures in the business world. A man whose decisions reverberated across industries, whose name commanded power and respect. The silence in the store was palpable. The other salespeople, who had been unaware of the gravity of the situation, slowly began to register the shift in atmosphere. Realization dawned, their expressions morphing from indifference to shock, as they, too, began to understand the weight of what had just transpired. Damien's next move was deliberate. He didn't raise his voice, didn't cause a scene. He simply walked over to the manager, who was standing nearby, watching the exchange with growing discomfort. "I'm not interested in a refund," Damien began, his voice steady and unyielding. "I'm interested in making sure you understand that the way you treat customers, especially based on assumptions, will cost you more than just a sale. It will cost you your reputation." The manager, who had been unaware of what had transpired, immediately apologized, but it was too late. Jenna, the cashier, and several other staff members were now standing awkwardly, their faces a mixture of shame and realization. The damage had already been done. As he walked out of the store, Damien's satisfaction was not just from the purchase, but from knowing he had left a lasting impression. The boutique would never forget the lesson they learned today. Never judge a book by its cover. And as for Jenna, she would find out just how difficult it was to keep a job when her actions came to light.